They priced him before they understood the problem. At first light, in a slave yard near the lower Mississippi, the auction men found a black man standing beside the wagon gate. Not sitting, not begging, not looking for a way out. Standing. He was taller than the gatepost, broad enough to make the doorway behind him look narrow, with dark brown skin, scarred hands, and shoulders that seemed built for work no one in that yard could imagine. The paper tied to his wrist had no clean name on it, just a mark, Abram. Maybe Abram Reed, maybe something stolen from somebody else's mouth. The trader holding the ledger looked at him once and smiled, because men like that meant money. Then Abram refused to take one step, not angrily, not loudly, not with a raised fist. He simply planted his bare feet in the red dirt, lowered his eyes toward the men who had come to sell him, and made the whole market discover a truth it had never prepared for. Rope can pull a body. It cannot pull consent from the ground. The first man to notice him was Jonas Vale, an auction broker with a clean coat, yellow teeth, and 20 years of practice turning human suffering into numbers. He had seen families split before breakfast. He had seen men faint from fever, women stare through walls, children cling to skirts until a whip made them let go. Nothing in that yard surprised Jonas anymore. That was what he believed. Until he looked across the gate and saw Abram. The morning fog still hung low over the pens. Its softened fences blurred the mule carts, turned the lanterns into weak orange moons. But it could not soften Abram. He stood too clearly, too still, too much like a tree that had grown in the wrong place and dared the axes to explain themselves. Jonas shut the ledger and walked toward him. The closer he came, the worse the situation looked. Abram was not merely tall. Tall men could be beaten, chained, sold, worked, and buried. This man looked heavy with something that did not come from muscle alone. His wrists were thick as fence rails. His neck was corded with old labor. Across one shoulder ran a pale scar, not the neat line of a single lash, but a torn mark that looked as if something large had tried to take a piece of him and failed. Jonas stopped an arm's length away. He had to look up. That irritated him. "What name do you answer to?" Abram looked at him. No answer. Jonas smiled the way cruel men smile when they feel watched. "You hear me?" Still nothing. Behind Jonas, a handler named Price Dawes laughed and came forward with a length of chain over his shoulder. Dawes was not a big man, but he had the confidence of a man who had always been allowed to hurt people smaller than himself. He slapped Abram's arm. The sound came back wrong. Not soft, not weak. It landed like a palm against green oak. Dawes stopped laughing. The enslaved people gathered along the far rail saw it happen. Some lowered their eyes for safety. Others kept watching because they felt, before anyone said it, that this was not an ordinary morning. Dawes wrapped the chain around Abram's left wrist. The cuff barely closed. He locked it anyway. Then he handed the loose end to two handlers and nodded toward the transport cart. "Move him." The men pulled. At first they pulled the way men pull a load they already believe they own. Then their boots slid. The chain straightened. Their shoulders tightened. The crowd leaned in. Abram did not lean back. That was what made it frightening. He did not fight them. He did not strain. He did not twist his wrist or dig his heels like a panicked man trying to escape. He only remained where he was. The chain trembled between their hands and his body, but Abram stayed so still that the handlers began to look ridiculous, like boys tugging a bell rope with no bell above them. Dawes cursed and grabbed the chain himself. 3 men pulled now. The iron links snapped tight. One mule in the cart line jerked its ears backward. The gatepost groaned. Abram's feet stayed in the red dirt. Jonas Vale felt the eyes of the yard turn on him. Buyers were watching. Drivers were watching. Other traders were watching. Worst of all, the people waiting to be sold were watching. In that world, control had to be visible. It had to look easy. The performance mattered as much as the whip. If one man could stand in the middle of a market and make 3 handlers look helpless, then the yard itself began to look smaller. Jonas stepped close and lowered his voice. "You will walk." Abram's eyes moved from the chain to Jonas's face. Then he spoke for the first time. His voice was low, dry, and steady. "Not for that rope." Nobody moved. The words were not a shout. That was worse. A shout could be punished. A plea could be ignored. But Abram had said it like a weather report, like a fact already proven. Not for that rope. Jonas turned away fast, pretending the moment meant nothing. Bring the wagon team. By mid-morning, the yard had swollen with witnesses. Slave buyers who had come for field hands stood beside merchants who smelled a story. Men from the docks drifted in and pretended they were there on business. A few free black laborers paused at the edge of the street, careful not to seem too interested, careful not to draw a white man's attention, but listening all the same. The auction yard had handled stubborn men before. That word, stubborn, was how cruelty excused itself. A man was not grieving, he was stubborn. A woman was not terrified, she was difficult. A child was not shattered, he was unruly. The yard had words for every pain it caused. But it did not have a word for Abram. Jonas sent for a heavier chain, the one used for transport south toward the cane fields. He sent for a reinforced cart with iron bands on the wheels. He sent for 4 more handlers and a pair of mules known for dragging timber. Every object that arrived made the men calmer. Iron comforts men who worship control. Wood comforts them. Locks comfort them. Weight comforts them most of all. They believe enough weight can answer anything. Abram watched it all without expression. His shirt was rough undyed cotton, stretched across his chest and torn near the collar. His trousers ended above his ankles. His feet were bare, cracked, and packed with old dirt as if they had crossed more miles than any man in the yard wanted to imagine. A buyer named Silas Horn arrived in a broad-brimmed hat and a white linen vest already dark under the arms. Horn owned Riverland. He understood labor as appetite. When he saw Abram, his face changed, not with pity, with arithmetic. He circled Abram slowly, never getting too close. How much? Jonas recovered his smile. Enough. Can he work? He can stand. Horn laughed once. So can a post. Jonas's smile hardened. He can work. Then move him. That was the moment the market became a stage. They fastened chains around Abram's wrists, around his waist, around the iron ring of the cart. They hitched the team. Dawes held one line. Another handler held the other, and Jonas raised his hand as if conducting a machine. Pull! The mules leaned forward. The cart lurched. The chains stretched. For 1 second the crowd thought the world had returned to its usual shape. Then the cart rolled backward. Not forward. Backward. Toward Abram. The mules cried out and scrambled in the dirt. Dawes nearly fell beneath the shaft. The crowd broke into gasps, then silence, because everyone had seen the same impossible thing. Abram had not dragged the cart. He had not tried to. The men had built their whole plan around moving him. Instead, their plan moved toward him. Horn's face lost its color. Jonas shouted for the team to stop, but the damage had already happened. A market can survive cruelty. It can survive noise. It can survive blood. What it cannot survive is laughter from the people it is trying to terrify. And somewhere near the rail, someone breathed out a sound too small to be called a laugh, but not small enough to be missed. Jonas heard it, Dawes heard it, Abram heard it too. His face did not change, but the yard did. From that moment on, every order given near Abram carried a question under it. What if he still does not move? They tried reason next, because men who live by force like to call it reason when force becomes embarrassing. Jonas asked where Abram had come from. The paperwork said only, inland consignment, debt settlement, male, prime age, exceptional size, no county, no owner of record worth trusting, no birth year, no price. Just a body entered into a ledger like a misplaced tool. A dock clerk said Abram had arrived 2 nights earlier on a flatboat with tobacco casks and 4 families from upriver. The others had stumbled off half-starved and sick with fear. Abram had stepped onto the landing by himself. No chain pulling him, no driver pushing him. He had looked at the river for a long time before he entered the yard. One woman in that shipment had whispered, "Do not put a rope on him." No one listened. Now the sentence came back like a warning from a door they had already opened. By noon, Jonas ordered Abram moved away from the public gate. Too many eyes, he said. What he meant was too many witnesses. They brought him into a side pen where the fence was higher and the dirt was packed hard from years of pacing feet. There, the cruelty grew quieter. Quiet cruelty is often the most organized kind. They denied him water until the sun had burned the fog away. They left the chain tight enough to bite his wrist. They threatened him with sale to the cane fields, with iron collars, with men who would make him wish he had walked. Abram listened. His breathing never changed. That frightened them more than rage would have. Rage gives the powerful a story they understand. Rage lets them say, he attacked, he was dangerous, he forced our hand. But Abram gave them nothing useful. No swing, no curse, no struggle. Just a silence so complete that the men around him had to hear themselves. By late afternoon, they brought an older black woman into the side pen to carry a water bucket. Her name was Ruth, though the yard ledger had written it as R female, aged. She kept her eyes down, but when she came near Abram, her hand tightened on the bucket handle. She had seen men like him only in stories told after dark. Not giants. That was not the point. Men of size existed. The stories were about men who had learned the hidden mathematics of survival. When to bend, when to vanish. When to hold still so completely the world broke its own teeth trying to force motion. Ruth set the bucket near Abram's feet. Dawes barked, "Not unless he walks." Ruth did not look at Dawes. She looked at Abram's toes, half buried in red dirt, and said so softly only he could hear it, "Ruth's drink after the storm." Abram's eyes lowered. For the first time all day something passed across his face. Not weakness, memory. He saw another riverbank, another woman. Not Ruth, but old Aunt Liza, whose back had bent under years of labor while her voice stayed straight. She had been the one who taught children how to survive men who owned paper. When they pull, she once told him, do not always pull back. Pulling back tells them where your strength is. Sometimes you let the rope tell on itself. He had been 15 then, already taller than the overseer, already being watched as a future tool. He had learned early that size was not safety. Size made men greedy. Size made them inventive. Size made them want to prove God had not made anything beyond their command. So Abram learned control. He learned how to lower his eyes without lowering his mind. He learned how to work without giving all of himself away. He learned how to walk into the woods and return before dawn with fish in a sack and no footprints near the road. He learned how to stand, not stiff, not foolish, not from pride, from patience. Years later, when debt men came to the plantation where he had been held, the owner tried to sell him twice. The first buyer returned him after 1 mile. The second never got him into a wagon. The third demanded a discount and left with a bruised team, a broken axle, and a story he told only when drunk. By the time Abram reached the river market, he had already become a problem passed from hand to hand. But problems have names when men create them. Abram was not a problem. He was a refusal. As evening came, Jonas Vale made his darkest attempt, not because he was brave, because he was afraid. He ordered a trench dug in the side pen and drove an iron stake deep into the packed earth. The stake was meant for shipping livestock, not people, but the yard had never been troubled by that difference. They linked Abram's waist chain to the stake. Then the cart team was hitched again. This time the plan was not merely to move him, it was to break the sight of him. If they could make him fall, crawl, twist, anything, the yard could breathe again. Jonas stood with his ledger under one arm. Silas Horn watched from the fence. Dawes spat into the dirt. The mules leaned. The stake shook. Abram's body rocked half an inch. The crowd held its breath. For the first time, a flash of pain crossed his eyes. The chain at his waist cut deep. His knees flexed. Dawes smiled. There he is. Abram closed his eyes. In the dark behind his eyelids, he heard Aunt Liza again. Root is not stone. Stone cracks. Root bends underground and holds. Abram bent, not enough to yield, only enough to survive the force. The stake tore loose from the dirt. It did not fly. It simply rose, dragging a clod of red earth with it, and fell at Abram's feet. The mules stumbled forward into the empty pull. Dawes shouted. Horn stepped back from the fence. Jonas dropped the ledger. For a moment, nobody moved. The torn hole in the ground looked obscene, like the yard itself had opened and shown them what their authority was planted in. Not law, not strength, not God, dirt, and dirt could let go. Ruth was still standing near the water bucket. This time, no one stopped her. She lifted the dipper, crossed the pen, and held it up to Abram's mouth. He drank slowly. Every eye in the yard watched. No one bid on him that evening. No one wanted to admit fear. They called it caution. They called it uncertainty. They called it transport risk. The words changed, but the meaning did not. A man the market could not move was a loss waiting to happen. That night, the auction yard stayed awake. Jonas sat under a lantern, rewriting the entry in his ledger again and again, as if better words might fix the facts. Prime male, unusually large, requires restraint, difficult temperament, potentially valuable. He crossed out difficult, then wrote, refuses movement under chain. He stared at the sentence. It looked impossible in ink. Beside him, Silas Horn said, there are men who will pay to see him. Jonas did not answer. Horn leaned closer. Not field labor, exhibition, curiosity, a giant like that. Abram turned his head. Just slightly. Horn stopped speaking. That was the strangest part. He was chained, surrounded, marked for sale, and still the men around him measured their words as if he were the one who might decide what happened next. Near midnight, a storm rolled in from the river. Rain hit the yard in hard silver lines. Buyers fled to covered porches. Lanterns hissed. The red dirt softened into mud. The handlers wanted to move Abram under shelter, not out of mercy, but because a sick man sold for less. Dawes grabbed the chain. Then he hesitated. The rain ran down Abram's face. His head was lifted now, not toward the men, but toward the weather. For the first time since morning he moved. Not because they pulled, not because they ordered. He stepped forward on his own. One step, then another. Every man under the porch froze. Abram walked past the stake hole, past the auction block, and stopped beneath the open rain where the gutters poured from the roof edge. He raised his chained hands and washed the dirt and blood from his wrists. No one touched him, no one spoke. The revelation settled over them with the storm. He could move. He had always been able to move. He simply would not let the rope be the reason. By morning, the story had escaped the yard. It moved through the docks in whispers. It crossed kitchen doors and stable walls. It traveled among enslaved people with the speed of a secret that knows where it is needed. A man stood in the auction yard and made the cart come to him. A man pulled the stake out of the earth without raising his hand. A man walked only when the chain stopped pretending it had the right to command him. By breakfast, the buyers had changed. Men still came to look, but now they looked from farther away. The auction platform filled with other people first. Sales continued because cruelty rarely stops for shame. Names were called. Prices rose. Families were separated. The market kept feeding itself. But when Abram's turn came, the yard changed temperature. Jonas Vale climbed onto the block with the ledger in his hand. His voice cracked once on the opening number. He pretended to cough. No one laughed. Abram stood below the platform, chains hanging from his wrists, rainwater still dark in the seams of his shirt. He did not look at the bidders. He looked beyond them, toward the river. Jonas called the first price. Silence. He lowered it. Silence. Horn looked at the ground. Another buyer leaned toward his clerk and whispered, "How do you deliver him?" That question killed the sale, because every man there understood the same ugly arithmetic. A human life could be stolen. A name could be stolen. A child could be stolen from a mother. A back could be forced into labor until it broke. But a purchase still required a future action. Transport, containment, obedience, delivery. A signature on paper meant nothing if the body beneath it refused the first mile. Jonas lowered the price again. His face reddened. The number fell so far that on any other day, buyers would have fought for it. Still no bids. Not because they had grown moral. They had grown afraid. Abram had not ended the market. No single man could do that in one morning. The blocks still stood. The chains still hung. The ledgers still waited for names. But he had done something the market hated almost as much as freedom. He had made its lie visible. He had shown that ownership was not a natural law. It was a performance, repeated by men with ropes, guns, papers, and witnesses. And performances can fail. By noon, Jonas slammed the ledger shut and ordered Abram removed from sale. The entry was marked in a cramped hand. No bid accepted. Transport refused. But people remembered it differently. Not as a clerk's note. Not as a failed transaction. They remembered the red dirt under Abram's feet. They remembered the chain trembling. They remembered the cart rolling backward. They remembered the iron stake pulled from the ground like a rotten tooth. And most of all, They remembered the rain, the sight of Abram walking when he chose to walk. That was the part no ledger could hold. Years later, people along the river still told the story in low voices. Some said Abram was sent upriver and vanished in the cypress swamps. Some said no trader would take him after that day, because a man who had embarrassed one market could ruin another. Some said he lived long enough to see the war come down the river in smoke and cannon light. No one could prove all of it. That is what happens when the record belongs to the people who sold bodies and not to the bodies themselves. The official paper tells you what they tried to do. The story tells you what they failed to understand. Abram was not magic. He was not a monster. He was not a myth built to make pain pretty. He was a man trapped inside a system that wanted every part of him reduced to price, weight, age, and use. So he defended the only territory no auctioneer could measure. The decision inside himself. The yard had rope. He had roots. And roots do not walk because a market tells them to.